The neon sign outside Maplewood Diner flickered in the drizzle, casting soft pink and blue reflections onto the wet asphalt. The clock above the counter ticked toward 7:15 a.m., and the world beyond the fogged windows was still half asleep. Trucks rumbled faintly on the highway, and the smell of bacon and coffee drifted through the diner like a familiar hymn. Booth number 4, near the window, belonged to Harold Whitman. Everyone in town knew that. If you came in before sunrise, you'd see him there, an old man in a brown plaid jacket, white hair combed neatly, and a newspaper folded perfectly in thirds beside his steaming cup of black coffee. Harold wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. But in this tiny Midwest town, he was a part of the landscape, as steady and reliable as the neon sign that buzzed above the door. People waved to him, even if they didn't know his name. Some said he'd worked at the steel mill before it shut down 15 years ago. Others whispered that he'd been in the army, though he never talked about it. Every morning he came in at the same time. He ordered the same breakfast, 2 scrambled eggs, wheat toast, and bacon crisp. He always left a $2 tip and sat for an hour sipping coffee and staring out the window like he was waiting for someone who never came. Maggie, the waitress, had been serving him for over 2 decades. She was in her 50s now, hair dyed a soft auburn, and still wore her wedding ring even though her husband had passed 8 years earlier. Harold and Maggie shared a kind of quiet understanding, 2 people who had seen too much change and too many goodbyes. "Morning." "Harold?" she said with her usual half-smile as she poured his coffee. "Morning, Maggie," he replied. His voice was calm, gentle. "How's the world treating you today?" "Same as always," she said, tucking her notepad into her apron. "Coffee's hot, toast's warm, and nobody's robbed the place yet." Harold chuckled softly. "Then we're off to a good start." The bell above the door jingled. Rain tapped against the window like tiny fingers. A man stepped inside and was not a local. The difference was instant and sharp, like a cold draft through an open door. He was younger than Harold, mid-40s maybe, dressed in a charcoal grey overcoat and polished shoes that looked too clean for this dusty roadside diner. Maggie noticed him right away. Outsiders were rare in Maplewood, especially on a Wednesday morning. The man scanned the room once, his gaze steady, searching. When his eyes landed on Harold, he hesitated for a fraction of a second, then started walking straight toward booth number 4. Harold looked up. His brows drew together, a faint crease forming between them. "Mind if I sit?" the man asked, his tone polite but firm. Harold gestured to the empty side of the booth. "It's a free country." The man slid in across from him. The vinyl seat squeaked under his weight. He took off his gloves, folded them neatly on the table, and smiled faintly. "I've been looking for you, Mr. Whitman," he said. Harold's hand stopped halfway to his coffee. "Do I know you?" "Not exactly," the man said, lowering his voice. "But you knew my father." Outside, thunder murmured over the grey horizon. The diner's lights flickered once. Inside, the air felt suddenly heavier, as though the past itself had pulled up a chair. Maggie watched from the counter, her instincts tingling. There was something about the stranger's posture, too still, too composed. Harold studied him quietly. "Your father, huh? I've known a lot of men. You'll have to narrow that down." The man leaned forward slightly. "He worked with you. Back in '78 at the mill." Harold's eyes flickered with something, recognition, maybe regret. "The mill," he repeated softly. "That was a lifetime ago," the stranger nodded. "For you, maybe. But for me, it's the reason I'm here." Rain streaked down the window, distorting the neon reflection into long, trembling lines. Somewhere the jukebox began playing an old country tune, the kind Harold used to hum to himself when he thought nobody was listening. The stranger reached into his coat pocket and slid a small photograph across the table. The edges were worn, the colors faded. Harold hesitated before turning it over. It was a picture of 5 men standing in front of the mill gates, smiling, their faces young and sunburned. Harold recognized them immediately. Himself, his old foreman Bill, and 3 others. But one face, the one on the far right, made his chest tighten. He looked up slowly. "Where did you get this?" The stranger didn't blink. "My father kept it, right up until the day he died." Harold swallowed hard, the taste of coffee turning bitter in his mouth. He wanted to ask a dozen questions, but his throat had gone dry. The man's gaze softened. "Before he passed, he said I should find you. He said, You were the only one who could tell me what really happened that night. A silence fell over booth number 4, deep and heavy. Outside, the rain thickened into a steady downpour. Inside, the steam from Harold's untouched coffee rose and vanished into the air, curling like ghostly breath. The diner felt unusually still after that. Even the hum of the refrigerator in the back seemed to fade beneath the tension sitting between the two men. Harold didn't move. He kept his hands wrapped around the warm mug, like it was the only steady thing left in the room. The stranger's photograph lay on the table between them, its glossy surface reflecting the dull neon light from outside. "Your father," Harold began, his voice raspy. "That's Frank Holloway, isn't it?" The stranger nodded once. "You remember him?" Harold exhaled slowly through his nose, a sound that carried years of weight. "Yeah, I remember Frank. Everybody remembered Frank. He was one of the good ones." The man leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. "He thought the same about you." Harold looked out the window. Beyond the glass, rain streaked down the diner sign, turning the bright pink Maplewood Diner letters into bleeding colors. The parking lot shimmered like a mirror. "Frank was a better man than me," Harold muttered. "Didn't deserve what happened." The younger man folded his hands together, elbows on the table. "That's exactly why I came here, Mr. Whitman, to find out what did happen." Harold's eyes darted toward him. "You think I know?" "I don't think," the man said quietly. "I know." Maggie approached the booth with Harold's plate, scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast. Her smile faltered when she felt the strange chill that hung in the air. She set the plate down carefully. "Everything okay over here?" "Just fine," Harold said quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The man across from him nodded politely. "Thank you, ma'am." Maggie hesitated for a moment, her gaze flicking between them, then walked away slowly. Harold picked up a piece of toast, broke it, and stared at the crumbs. "You know, Frank and we used to eat here, every Friday night after the late shift. He'd always order pie, even if he was dead tired." He gave a small laugh, but it sounded hollow. Said it made the long weeks easier. The stranger listened quietly. "He hadn't touched his coffee. I was 12, the man finally said, the night my father disappeared. Mom told me he was working overtime at the mill. But when he didn't come home, she started calling. Nobody picked up. A week later, they found his car near the river. No sign of him." His voice trembled slightly. "The police said he probably drowned. But they never found a body." Harold's face went pale. He pressed his lips together. "I looked through his things after he died," the man continued. "Found letters, payslips, photos, and one note with your name on it." Harold looked at him sharply. "A note?" The stranger nodded. "It said, if anything happens to me, find Harold Whitman. He'll know why." The diner lights buzzed faintly overhead. Somewhere in the back, a pot clattered in the sink. Harold leaned back, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for his coffee. "That was 45 years ago," he said softly. "Some things are better left where they belong." "I don't believe that," the man replied. His tone was calm, but his eyes burned with determination. "If someone took my father from me, I deserve to know who and why." Harold didn't answer. He just stared down at his reflection in the dark surface of his coffee. His face looked older than he remembered. Outside, a truck rumbled past, its headlights cutting across the diner before vanishing into the rain. Finally, Harold sighed. "Frank was my shift partner at the mill," he said almost to himself. "We worked nights, maintenance duty. One Friday, management told us to clear a section near the old furnace. There'd been an accident. They said it was electrical. Told us to seal the area and not ask questions." He paused. His voice lowered. "But Frank..." He didn't like not asking questions. The stranger listened closely, his jaw tight. "He found something," Harold said after a long silence. "I don't know what it was. Papers, maybe. Or records. Whatever it was, he looked scared. Said he was going to the police. And then he disappeared," the man finished for him. Harold nodded slowly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain beat harder against the windows, and the faint glow of morning had turned into a dim grey haze. Maggie glanced over from behind the counter, sensing that something wasn't right. She'd seen Harold upset before, the day his wife passed, the day the mill closed. But this was different. This was fear. The stranger sat back in the booth, studying Harold carefully. "You were the last person to see him, weren't you?" Harold didn't deny it. "I told him not to go," he whispered. "Told him to keep his mouth shut." But Frank was stubborn. He wanted to do the right thing, he said. Truth mattered more than survival. He looked up, his eyes glassy. And I told him that sometimes survival is the truth. The younger man leaned forward. What happened after that? Harold's lips trembled. He left the diner that night. I watched him go out into the rain. Said he was heading to the sheriff's office, but he never made it. The stranger's voice hardened. And you just let him walk away? Harold's shoulders sagged. I was a coward, the stranger exhaled, shaking his head slowly. He trusted you. I know, Harold said, voice cracking. And I've lived every day since then, trying to forget that I didn't stop him. The man opened his mouth to say something, but Harold raised a trembling hand. You want to know the worst part? He said. The sheriff back then. He wasn't some good old boy in a tan hat. He was working for the Mills Board. The whole town was. Everything, police, newspapers, even the mayor was under their thumb. And Frank didn't stand a chance. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the two faces across the booth. One young and furious, the other old and broken. You said your father's car was found near the river, Harold whispered. That's because that's where they dumped him. I didn't see it, but I heard things. Quiet things. Things you don't forget even if you try. The man stared at him, eyes wet. You could have told someone. Harold smiled sadly. Who? They'd have buried me next to him. The silence that followed was unbearable. The jukebox clicked, switched tracks, and began playing an old tune. Elvis Presley's Are You Lonesome Tonight? Harold looked out the window. You know, every morning I sit here and drink my coffee, hoping one day someone will sit across from me and ask the question you just did. I guess that day finally came. The stranger swallowed hard. So why tell me now? Harold turned back to him. Because, son, he said softly, I don't have many mornings left. Outside, the rain eased to a drizzle again. Inside, booth number 4 fell silent except for the faint hum of the lights and the slow ticking of the clock. The photograph still lay on the table, the faces of 5 men frozen in time, smiling, unaware that one of them would vanish before the next sunrise. The clock above the counter ticked toward 8:10 a.m. The rain outside had slowed to a cold mist, blurring the diner's windows into a watercolor of headlights and grey skies. Maggie wiped the same counter for the 3rd time, pretending not to watch booth number 4. Harold and the stranger hadn't moved much. 2 cups of coffee sat between them, one untouched, one now cold. The photograph still lay there, damp from the moisture in the air, curling slightly at the edges. Harold finally spoke, his voice a quiet rasp. I thought about telling your mother, he said. I even drove by your house one night. Saw the porch light was on, but I couldn't make myself knock on the door. The younger man's eyes softened for a moment, but he didn't interrupt. I told myself I was protecting her, Harold went on, but that was a lie. I was protecting me, because if I told the truth they would have buried me next to Frank. He rubbed his temple with trembling fingers, as if the memory itself caused pain. After he disappeared, they called me in. Men in suits, not cops, said the mill accident report would stay closed, and I'd better forget everything I saw. A week later, I found an envelope on my porch, $5,000 in cash. The stranger's jaw tightened. You took it? Harold's eyes glistened. I did, and I've hated myself every day since. The diner was nearly empty now. A young couple in raincoats whispered at a corner booth, and the jukebox played a faint tune, Blue Moon of Kentucky. The smell of bacon had long faded, replaced by that damp, metallic scent that comes after rain. The younger man leaned forward. You said Frank found something. Papers, records. What were they? Harold hesitated. His fingers tapped the table rhythmically. There were documents about the old furnace, he said. Maintenance logs, shipment invoices, payroll lists. But one sheet stood out, a list of names. Mine, Frank's, a few others, and someone high up. A name that shouldn't have been there. Who? The man pressed. Harold looked around as if afraid the walls might be listening. The town sheriff, he whispered. The younger man blinked. Sheriff Doyle? Harold nodded. The same. The stranger laughed bitterly. He was hailed as a hero for years. Had his picture up at the town hall. Died with medals and speeches. Heroes are just men with better lies, Harold murmured. The man's hand clenched into a fist. You're telling me the sheriff killed my father? Harold shook his head slowly. No, he didn't do it himself. but he made sure it got done. Frank was going to expose a cover-up. The mill had been dumping chemical waste into the river for years, the same river where they found his car. The younger man's face darkened. "That river runs through my mother's backyard." Harold looked down. "I know." Lightning flashed briefly outside, though there was no thunder. Just that eerie brightness that makes the world look like it's been frozen in glass. The man exhaled sharply. "You should have come forward. All those years, and the mill closed, the company vanished, but my family—" He stopped, voice trembling. "We were left with nothing. My mum died believing he ran away." Harold's voice cracked. "I know, son. And I can't undo that." For a long minute they just sat there, 2 generations trapped by a truth buried too deep and too long. Maggie finally walked over, unable to bear the silence any longer. "Refill?" she asked, her voice soft but strained. Harold nodded weakly. The stranger shook his head. As Maggie poured the coffee, she glanced at the stranger. "You're not from around here, are you?" He forced a polite smile. "No, ma'am. Just passing through." "Well," she said, smiling faintly, "Maplewood's the kind of place where people stay too long. Careful, or it might keep you too." She walked away before either of them could respond. The younger man turned back to Harold. "So what now?" he asked. "You just tell me this and expect me to move on." Harold's voice steadied, low but firm. "I don't expect anything from you. But I wanted you to know before—" He paused, then looked down at his shaking hands. "Tired before I go? What do you mean?" Harold looked up, eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Doctor says I've got maybe a few weeks, cancer, liver." The man blinked, caught off guard. I didn't know." "Didn't tell anyone," Harold said with a weak chuckle. "Guess I figured if I stayed quiet long enough, I'd take my sins with me." He slid something across the table, an old key, rusted and taped to a folded note. "There's a locker at the bus depot," he said. "I kept a few things there. Papers, letters, things I was too scared to burn." The man stared at the key. "What's in it?" "The rest of the truth," Harold said. The diner door opened again. A gust of cold air swept in. A man in a wet leather jacket stepped inside, shaking off the rain. He scanned the room quickly, not like a stranger, but like someone looking for someone specific. The newcomer's eyes landed on Harold and the stranger. His expression didn't change, but he started walking toward booth number 4. Harold noticed him first. His face drained of color. "Don't look," he whispered sharply. "Just listen." The younger man froze. "Who is he?" Harold's gaze stayed fixed on the stranger approaching. "He's what's left of them." The man in the leather jacket reached their booth and smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, Mr. Whitman. Didn't expect to find you entertaining guests." Harold's voice was calm but cold. "He's nobody." "Just passing through." "Sure he is," the man said, glancing at the younger man. "You mind if I sit?" The younger man tensed. Harold's fingers twitched near his coffee cup, like muscle memory from another life. The man didn't wait for permission. He slid into the booth beside Harold, the leather creaking as he leaned back. "Heard you were sick," he said casually. "Sorry to hear it." Harold didn't respond. The man tapped the photograph on the table with a gloved finger. "Funny thing finding this old picture again. Lot of memories in it. Some people just don't know when to let the past stay buried." The younger man's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" The man's smile widened, but his eyes stayed hard. "Just someone who used to work at the mill." "Like your dad?" Harold's throat tightened. "Leave him out of this." The man leaned forward, his breath smelling faintly of mint and tobacco. "Oh, I will. But you, Harold, you should have kept your mouth shut." He stood, tossed a few crumpled bills on the table for show, and whispered as he passed, "Some ghosts don't like being dug up." Then he walked out, the bell over the door jingling softly behind him. Harold's hand trembled. The younger man looked at him, horrified. "Who was that?" Harold stared at the window, where the man's dark silhouette was already fading into the rain. Someone who should have been dead 40 years ago. The diner was silent again, but this time it felt as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. The rain had stopped, but the sky still hung low and grey, like a ceiling waiting to collapse. The neon sign outside Maplewood Diner flickered one last time before dying completely, leaving the windows lit only by the weak glow of the overcast morning. Inside, the air was thick with unease. The man in the leather jacket had left no trace, except for the faint smell of cigarette smoke and the sound of the door chime that still seemed to echo in Harold's chest. The younger man, Frank's son, stared at the door for a long time. His heart beat loud in his ears. Harold slowly lifted his coffee cup to his lips, but his hand was trembling so badly that the cup rattled against the saucer. He set it down again. "I told you," he said quietly. "They never really went away." "Who was that?" the younger man demanded. Harold looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. "His name's Carl Denton. He used to be a foreman at the mill, a company enforcer, really. If somebody talked too much, Carl made sure they didn't talk again." The younger man's jaw clenched. "You mean he's a killer?" Harold didn't answer right away. He stared into the distance, his eyes glassy. Back in the late 70s, the mill was everything in this town, jobs, homes, even the church donations. The company owned the sheriff, the mayor, the papers, every damn thing. And when Frank found proof they were dumping waste into the river, he was a problem. Carl made problems disappear. The younger man felt his chest tighten, and now he's back. "After all these years, he never left," Harold said bitterly. "He stayed here, kept quiet, blended in, probably running errands for whoever bought the old mill land. Men like Carl don't retire. They just wait for the next order." The diner's clock ticked loudly. Maggie glanced over again, worry etched on her face, but Harold shook his head slightly as if to say, "Don't come over." The younger man leaned forward. "You said you kept documents, records. Are they enough to expose what happened?" Harold's eyes shifted toward the window, as if he were checking for shadows. "They're enough to burn this town to the ground." The younger man nodded. "Then I'll take them. I'll go to the feds, the press, whoever listens." Harold smiled faintly, but there was no joy in it. "You think they'll listen? The people who buried your father are the same kind who write the news. Then I'll make them listen." Harold studied him for a long moment. "You sound just like him," he said finally. "Frank used to talk that way too. Like the world still had justice left in it." The younger man's voice softened. "Maybe he got that from me." For the first time that morning, Harold's lips twitched into a real smile, but it faded quickly as headlights passed by outside. His eyes darted toward the glass. "We can't talk here anymore," he said. "They saw us together. That means they know." "They?" Harold didn't answer. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small battered envelope. It looked decades old, yellowed and soft around the edges. "If anything happens to me," he said, sliding it across the table, "you get that key to the depot and open locker 217, but not now. Not tonight. Wait until morning. The depot's quiet then. There's a camera above the lockers, but only one angle. Keep your back to it." The younger man took the envelope with shaking hands. "What's in here?" Harold's eyes darkened. "The address. And a name you're not ready to see yet." Before the younger man could ask more, Harold suddenly tensed. He was staring past him, toward the window. A black sedan had pulled into the parking lot. Its engine idled, headlights dimmed. Two silhouettes sat inside, unmoving. "Don't turn around," Harold said sharply. "Just keep looking at me." The younger man's pulse quickened. "What do they want?" Harold's voice was steady but low. "To make sure I don't start remembering too much." "Then let's get out of here," the younger man said, his voice rising. "No," Harold whispered. "If we run now, they'll know you know." Maggie approached cautiously, towel in hand. "Harold, you all right?" Harold looked up, forcing a smile that was all wrong. "Yeah, Mags, just a long morning." She frowned, glanced outside, and her face drained of color. "Are you expecting company?" "Not today," Harold murmured. The car door opened. A man stepped out, tall, heavy-set in a black raincoat. He didn't look toward the diner, but he didn't need to. The younger man could feel his presence, the kind of aura that makes air itself grow thick. "Listen to me," Harold said quickly. "Go out the back door, through the kitchen. There's an alley that leads to the bus depot. You'll find a payphone there. Call this number." He scribbled something on a napkin with Maggie's pen. His hand trembled so badly that the ink smeared. "What about you?" "I'll stall them." "No, I'm not leaving you." Harold's eyes locked onto his. "Son, this isn't about me anymore. It's about finishing what your father started. Don't waste it." Before the younger man could protest, Harold stood up from the booth, steadying himself on the table. His knees cracked, but there was a strange strength in his posture, like a soldier stepping out for one final duty. The bell above the diner door chimed. The man in the black raincoat entered, his expression unreadable, eyes scanning the room with the slow precision of a predator. "Morning, Harold," he said, his voice like gravel. Harold forced a faint grin. "Didn't expect to see you again, Carl." Carl's eyes drifted toward the younger man who sat motionless, pretending to look at his coffee. "Friend of yours?" "Just an old reporter," Harold said. "He's been asking about the mill." Carl's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Funny. Some stories are better left untold." "Some aren't stories," Harold replied. "They're confessions." For a brief second, their eyes met, old enemies locked in a silent standoff neither wanted but both understood. The younger man slid quietly out of the booth and moved toward the counter, trying not to draw attention. Maggie was frozen near the register, her eyes wide. Carl didn't look at him again. His focus stayed on Harold. "I should have stayed quiet, old man." "I've been quiet long enough." Carl took a step closer. "You're dying anyway. Why make it messy?" Harold's voice was steady. "Because truth deserves a witness." At that moment, the younger man slipped through the swinging kitchen door. The smell of onions and grease filled his nostrils as he hurried past the back counter. Outside, the alley waited, narrow, slick, and silent. He could still hear Carl's voice through the door, low and threatening. Then a loud crash, the sound of glass shattering. Maggie screamed. The younger man froze, heart pounding, his breath fogging in the cold air. Another crash, followed by a deep, guttural cough. He turned back toward the door, but stopped when he saw movement through the diner's frosted window. Our shape, Carl's looming over Harold, then collapsing forward. Seconds later, Harold appeared in the doorway, clutching his side. His shirt was soaked with blood. "Go!" he shouted, voice hoarse. "Don't stop." "But no." The younger man ran, through puddles, down the alley, his shoes slipping on wet asphalt. Behind him, sirens began to wail, faint at first, then growing louder, echoing through the town's narrow streets. He didn't look back. He couldn't. When he reached the bus depot, dawn was breaking through the mist, pale and weak. He leaned against a lamppost, panting, the envelope still clutched in his hand. Locker 217. He stared at the row of lockers, their metal doors reflecting the grey morning light. Behind him, somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard a gunshot, and then silence, the kind of silence that swallows everything. The first light of morning broke through the thick clouds, dull and silver, illuminating the quiet streets of Maplewood. The rain had stopped, but everything was soaked. The diner's neon sign buzzed weakly again, flickering like a wounded heartbeat. The bus depot stood 3 blocks away, just as Harold had said. It was an old brick building with faded paint and a broken clock that had been stuck at 9:45 for years. The younger man, whose name was Daniel Holloway, slowed his pace as he approached, his lungs burning from the run. His shoes squelched with every step, leaving muddy footprints on the concrete floor as he entered. The depot was nearly empty. A janitor mopped the floor near the ticket counter, humming tunelessly to himself. A woman in a denim jacket sat on a bench, holding a crying baby. The air smelled of diesel and wet paper. Daniel's heart was still hammering in his chest. He kept seeing flashes of Harold, the old man's trembling hands, the blood spreading across his shirt, his voice shouting, "Go! Don't stop!" He walked to the locker room quietly. Rows of metal lockers stretched along the wall, each numbered in white paint that had started to peel with age. He found number 217 near the end of the row. The metal was cold to the touch. He pulled the key from his pocket, his fingers still shaking. He hesitated. Every instinct told him this was the point of no return. Then he slid the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open. Inside was a small cardboard box wrapped in an old brown paper bag, sealed with masking tape that had dried and curled. On top of the box was an envelope with his name written in faded ink, Daniel Holloway. He froze. Harold had written this before today. Daniel tore it open. Inside was a handwritten letter, trembling and uneven, clearly written by a man near the end of his strength. "Daniel, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. Don't waste time blaming yourself. I had it coming. I carried silence like a sickness, and it's time the truth spoke louder than I ever did. Inside this box are copies of what Frank found: mill documents, bank ledgers, shipment manifests, and one cassette tape. You'll find a recording from the night he disappeared. I didn't know it existed until years later. I found it in an old toolbox when they shut the mill down. You'll also find a name written on the back of one of the invoices. That name is the one who ordered it done, the one who signed off on everything. If you're smart, you won't go to the police, not yet. Take it to the press, the state investigators, or anyone who doesn't drink from the same well as this town. They'll come after you. They always do. But you have something they don't. Your father's courage. Use it. Tell him I'm sorry. Harold Whitman. Daniel sat there for a long moment, the words blurring as his eyes filled with tears. He wiped them roughly, breathing hard, trying to focus. He opened the box. Inside were stacks of folded papers, payroll logs, maintenance reports, typewritten memos with the mill's letterhead. There were photocopies of signatures, most of them faded. Near the bottom lay a small black cassette tape wrapped in a paper towel. Harold had scrawled across it, Mill Office, November 3, 1978, Frank H. Daniel stared at it, feeling the weight of decades pressing down. His fingers trembled as he slipped the tape into his coat pocket. Then, from a sound behind him, footsteps. He froze, the instinct to run rising again. Slowly, he turned. At the far end of the depot, two men had entered, one tall and broad, the other lean and sharp-faced. They weren't passengers. Their coats were too heavy, their eyes too watchful. One of them looked straight at Daniel. They found me, he thought. He shoved the papers back into the box, slammed the locker shut, and started walking, not too fast, not too slow, toward the exit. His heart pounded in his ears. "Hey, kid," one of the men called out. "You dropped something." Daniel didn't turn around. He kept walking. The men followed, their footsteps echoing louder. He pushed through the front doors into the street. The morning air hit him like ice. He ran. "Hey!" one of the men shouted. Daniel sprinted down Main Street, clutching the cassette in his pocket. The sound of footsteps chased him, fast, steady, trained. He darted into an alley, cutting between two buildings, his breath coming in ragged bursts. Behind him, he heard the crack of a gun. The bullet hit the wall inches from his shoulder, chipping the brick. He ducked behind a dumpster, pressing his back to the cold metal. The smell of garbage and rain filled his nose. Another shot rang out. Then, silence. "Daniel," a voice called. "We just want to talk." He recognized it. Carl Denton, the voice from the diner, the voice that had haunted his father and now hunted him. "You should have stayed out of it, kid," Carl's voice echoed through the alley. "You dig into the past digs back." Daniel's hand tightened around the cassette. His father's voice was on it. Whatever truth Harold had hidden was right here, small enough to fit in his pocket, powerful enough to kill for. He spotted an old fire escape ladder nearby and climbed it quietly, his hands slipping on the wet metal. He pulled himself up to the rooftop, crouching low. From there, he could see Carl below, scanning the shadows, his gun drawn. Daniel's chest heaved. He had two choices, run or fight for the truth. Then he saw it. A police cruiser turning onto Main Street, its lights flashing faintly in the distance. Carl swore under his breath and motioned to his partner. "We'll find him later." They disappeared down the opposite end of the alley. Daniel stayed still until he couldn't hear footsteps anymore. Then he finally let himself breathe. He sat there on the rooftop, the sky heavy with low grey clouds, and pulled the cassette from his pocket. It looked harmless, just a small piece of plastic. But inside it, his father's voice had been waiting 47 years to speak. He stared at it for a long moment before whispering, "Okay, Dad. Let's hear what you left behind." He climbed down, keeping to the shadows, and made his way toward the old hardware shop 2 blocks away. It had been closed for years, but Harold had once told him it still had a working radio deck in the basement, a relic from better times. By the time Daniel reached the shop, the sirens from the diner were faint in the distance. The streets were empty, quiet like the whole town was holding its breath. He found the back door unlocked. Inside, dust floated through the pale morning light. Shelves leaned crookedly, tools rusted in place. The air smelled of iron and oil. He found the basement door and went down the narrow stairs, his flashlight flickering weakly. In the far corner stood an old cassette player covered in cobwebs. He brushed it clean, popped the tape in, and pressed play. For a moment, there was only static. Then, A man's voice. Low, nervous, breathing hard. "If anyone finds this..." "My name is Frank Holloway." "They're not accidents, none of them. The mill's been dumping chemicals into the river for years. I've got the records. The sheriff's involved. I don't know who else I can trust." Static again. Then a second voice. Colder, sharper. "You shouldn't have come back here, Frank." Daniel's heart froze. There was a struggle, crashing metal, the sound of fists, Frank gasping for air, then a muffled gunshot. The tape went silent. Daniel's hands shook as he pressed stop. He sat there in the dim basement, the truth echoing in his ears. His father hadn't drowned. He'd been murdered. And the sheriff, the town's most decorated man, had ordered it. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he whispered, voice trembling with fury. "They buried him in lies. But I'm going to dig every one of them up." He pocketed the cassette again and walked up the stairs into the light. The town of Maplewood stretched before him, quiet, small, ordinary, the kind of place people forgot about, but not for long. He looked toward the horizon where the diner stood, now surrounded by flashing lights and police tape. Somewhere inside, Harold Whitman lay still. Daniel clenched his fists. "I'll finish it for you. Both of you." Then he walked toward the rising sun. The sun had begun to rise over Maplewood, staining the low clouds in hues of dull gold and soft orange. For the first time in decades, the town seemed quieter than usual, not peaceful but heavy, as if it knew that a secret long buried beneath its streets was finally waking up. Daniel Holloway walked along the cracked sidewalk, his coat soaked and his shoes squeaking softly. Every step echoed faintly in the empty streets. He had barely slept. The cassette's final words kept looping in his head. "The sheriff's involved. I don't know who else I can trust." Now he knew the truth. His father hadn't died by accident. He'd been silenced, murdered, to keep an entire town from seeing what was poisoning them. Harold Whitman was dead. Carl Denton was on the run, and Daniel, the last living witness, carried the evidence that could destroy everything the mill and its men had built. He stopped outside the diner. It was surrounded by yellow police tape, flashing red and blue lights reflected in puddles. Two officers stood by the entrance, talking in low voices. A white coroner's van idled nearby. Daniel's throat tightened. Through the rain-smeared glass he saw the booth, Harold's booth, now empty except for the coffee mug that still sat there half full, cold, forgotten. He wanted to go inside. To say something, anything, but what was there left to say? The old man had died trying to fix the mistake he'd carried for half a century. Instead, Daniel pulled the envelope from his coat. Inside it were the documents and the cassette. Harold's final legacy, his father's last message. He turned and began walking toward the bus depot again. There, inside the dim terminal, sat a grey-haired woman with a stack of newspapers beside her. She looked up as he entered. "Morning, sir." "Heading out?" "Not yet," Daniel said, catching his breath. "Do you still sell long-distance stamps?" The woman smiled faintly. "By the window. But you'll need to fill out a parcel form if you're mailing something heavier." He nodded, bought a large padded envelope, and sat at a small wooden bench near the wall. He carefully placed the cassette, the papers, and Harold's letter inside, sealing it tight. On the front, he wrote in steady block letters, "To the Investigative Desk, Chicago Tribune, Attention, Environmental Crimes Division." He slid a few dollar bills to pay for express delivery. The woman took the envelope, stamped it twice, and said, "Goes out on the 9 o'clock truck." Daniel nodded. "Make sure it gets there." "It will," she said softly, as he walked out of the depot. His hands felt strangely light, like he'd handed off not just evidence, but a curse. The morning air carried the faint smell of oil and wet leaves. He looked up at the sky. For the first time, he saw light breaking through the clouds, but it didn't last. A black sedan turned the corner, its tires hissing on the wet pavement. His chest tightened. He recognized the car instantly, the same one from the diner, Carl Denton. Daniel's instincts kicked in. He darted across the street, weaving between parked cars, his heart pounding. The sedan slowed. The tinted window rolled down. Carl's voice came through, cold and clear. "You should have listened to Harold. Some ghosts need to stay dead." A gun glinted in his hand. Daniel dove behind a mailbox as the first shot cracked through the air. A bullet punched through the metal, ricocheted, and buried itself in the wall behind him. Pedestrians screamed. The street erupted in chaos. Daniel ran. He sprinted down an alley, jumped a fence, stumbled into a narrow back road that led toward the river. His breath came in sharp, ragged bursts. Behind him, the sedan roared to life, tires screeching. He slipped, caught himself, kept running. His lungs burned. His father's voice echoed in his mind, the final words from the tape. "If anyone finds this, don't let them win." Ahead, the river shimmered in the early light. The same river where Frank Holloway's car had been found 47 years ago. The current was fast from the night's rain. Daniel reached the edge and turned, panting, as Carl stepped out of the car. He looked older now, exhausted, but his eyes were still cruel. "You've got your father's look," Carl said, leveling the gun. "That same damn look when he wouldn't shut up." Daniel's voice was steady. "He wasn't afraid of you," Carl sneered. "So I should have been." He pulled the trigger. Click. The gun jammed. Carl cursed, tried to fix it, but Daniel lunged forward, slamming into him with all the strength left in his body. They struggled near the edge of the embankment, boots sliding on wet grass. The gun clattered into the mud. Carl swung first, hitting Daniel in the jaw. Daniel stumbled, but then he saw it. A rusted steel rod half buried in the dirt. He grabbed it and swung back. The blow caught Carl's shoulder. He staggered, lost balance, and fell backward. Into the river there was a splash. Then nothing but the sound of rushing water. Daniel stood there, shaking, staring at the rippling surface where Carl had vanished. He didn't move for a long time. The sky brightened slowly above him. By the time the police arrived, alerted by witnesses, Daniel was sitting by the riverbank, soaked, bloodied, silent. A young officer approached cautiously. "Sir, are you hurt?" Daniel looked up, his expression distant. "Hey, it's over." The officer frowned. "What's over?" Daniel exhaled, eyes fixed on the river. The lie. 2 weeks later, Chicago Tribune, front page. Headline, "Long-buried environmental scandal exposed. Town sheriff linked to cover-up and murder." The article ran with copies of the mill documents and a transcript of the cassette recording. The truth had finally reached daylight. Within days, state investigators arrived in Maplewood. Old records were unsealed. Bank accounts frozen. The sheriff's legacy was shredded in public hearings. And at the bottom of page 5, in small print, was a name few would recognize, Harold Whitman, listed as a posthumous whistleblower. Daniel read the article alone in a diner 2 towns away. Not Maplewood Diner. That one had closed for investigation. But this place smelled the same. Coffee, bacon, and old wood polish. He sat in a booth near the window, the morning sun painting long streaks across the table. On the seat beside him lay Harold's old photograph, the one of the 5 men at the mill gates. He traced their faces with his finger. His father, Harold, Bill, the rest already gone. Then he noticed something he hadn't before, a faint reflection in the diner window, overlapping the photo. For a moment, it looked like Harold sitting across from him again, smiling faintly the way he used to. Daniel blinked, and the reflection was gone. He smiled anyway. Outside, a bus rumbled past, heading east toward Chicago. Somewhere far away, truth was already moving and unstoppable now. He whispered under his breath, "Rest now. Dad, you're free." He took one last sip of coffee, stood, and walked out into the morning light. Epilogue. Months later, tourists sometimes stopped by the old Maplewood Diner, now boarded up, its sign faded and letters missing. But in the corner booth, where the light always seemed a little warmer, locals still said you could sometimes see the faint outline of an old man sipping coffee, staring out the window, booth number 4. And if you listened closely over the hum of traffic and wind, you might hear a quiet voice say, "Some ghosts don't haunt to scare. They haunt to finish what the living never could."